all the way from Seattle to beautiful downtown San Diego.
Hello, this is Sean Comerford, and I'm coming to you from San Diego and the Story Cycle, America's Coast and Climate Crisis. That means I'm at the end of a 5,000-mile, 6-month journey from Bar Harbor, Maine, along the Atlantic coast down to Key West, taking an Amtrak over to Seattle, and then coming down the Pacific coast to here in San Diego on G Street Pier in front of the USS Midway, in front of a bunch of fishing boats behind me, and earlier a harbor seal fishing for fish, and very much out in nature as I have been for 6 months, and asking people about their views and experiences on climate change. And it all started in winter. It started in November and on the Day of the Dead. And little did I know that week that I started this whole venture, that half a world away in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, the UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres told the climate change conference, we are in the fight of our lives and we are losing. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. And very much along the way, I had this feeling that a clock is ticking and the room is heating up. And I must say that also, as beautiful as this ride was, and as exhilarating and as life-affirming as it was, I went along this ride with the view of all that might be changing in the coming years. And it wasn't just a bicycle ride, it was looking at nature and all around me as something that is vulnerable to what's changing right now in all the climate and all the globe. So it started in November, and it was unseasonably warm in Maine, but it soon got freezing, and the rains started up, and I had a flat in Brooklyn during a real downpour on Thanksgiving weekend. And then I had then we had a big storm called a bomb cyclone that affected 2/3 of the United States, and I was on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and in a high-rise hotel that was built on top of the shifting sands of the Outer Banks. And then made it all the way down to Key West, and had so many incredible interviews that when I got to Key West, I looked back on the 170 interviews and said, look, this is a job half done. And even though I didn't want to do it, I decided at that point, I've got to double the size of this project. Even though I had this feeling of completion, I doubled down, and I heard all about the West Coast and the severe storms that they were having out there. But nonetheless, I felt like I had to go, so I took that Amtrak across the country and got to Seattle, headed out to the coast, and it was raining most days. Some days all day, and some days all night, through Washington and Oregon. And it was February. I started in February. So then I made it my way here into California. And in Northern California, I started reading about all the history of the conflict between the white settlers and the Native Americans. And just by happenstance, in the Redwoods, I came across a visitor center that had a woman named Princess Colgrove, who was a member of the Hoopa tribe, and she just blew me away with stories about how her traditional way of life was being threatened by climate change and by that winter. In fact, let's talk a little bit about the winter. According to the San Jose Mercury News, the winter of 22-23 produced a parade of 30 atmospheric river storms, 97-mile-an-hour winds, destructive tidal surges, bomb cyclones, flash floods, levee breaks, the Fujiwara effect, which are two cyclones cycling around each other. Snow piled more than 240 inches deep in the Mammoth Pass. And into this I rode. And so, Big Sur was closed completely, so that made me have a long detour, and parts of the Avenue of the Giants through the redwoods were closed, and so a lot of Route 1 routes were cut off just into one lane, and I had to wait until the construction crews would let me go through, and I had long conversations with those young men holding the signs, and I had in all about 14 flats. I had a broken chain outside of Mendocino, and in Mendocino is a small village north of San Francisco in northern California, in the south of the redwoods, but mostly, not all. But it has water. It doesn't have a local source of water, and so during these droughts of the last 10 years, it ran out of water and had to have water trucked in. And so, and redwoods turned out to be much more a part of the climate story than I had known before. They grow 30 stories tall and they're 2,000 years old, but they take out of the air, a lot out of the fog and out of the rain, 160 gallons of water a day for a single tree. They can capture 3 times the carbon dioxide of a normal tree. And nonetheless, climate change means that places like Muir Woods, north of San Francisco, great climbing area, beautiful, but hard for bicyclers. Their fog is measurably down over the last decade by over a third. And that's where these redwoods get their sources of water. And so they're now open to another threat, including these overheated summers, these droughts, and rain events that oversoak them, and so it's another one of these things that are threatening the redwoods, which are part of the story here on the West Coast. And the West Coast, of course, I saw a lot of real estate values that were sky high in cost, and insurance that's a problem, but people were dying to live by them, and they all seem to be aware of climate change and the rising sea levels and erosion, and Highway 1 itself may have to be moved. However, the draw of the ocean is so strong, people are just dying to be near it. And in Bodega Bay, north of San Francisco also, I pulled over to talk to a beekeeper and a roadside honey entrepreneur. And I rode along the San Andreas Fault through Point Reyes and across the foggy Golden Gate Bridge into San Francisco. And in San Francisco, I interviewed George Sheehan, who was a spokesman for the environmental department there. They want to be zero waste. They have electric vehicle policies. They have a variety of green policies throughout the city. One of the most progressive cities in the world when it comes to climate change. And Sheehan is a climate optimist, and I'll tell you more about that in the end. I went through Salinas, and I saw a bit of Steinbeck country in the flooded Central Valley, and I went to San Luis Obispo, and I stayed for an international film festival and watched 3 films that had climate change themes in them. More international awareness and local of climate change. And when I got to Santa Barbara, one of the great cities of America that I hadn't really understood how great it is, I would not leave until I got a hold of an academic. I interviewed some wicked smart students, but I had to get a hold of an academic because Santa Barbara has the largest environmental studies program in the United States, for sure, and is the place that started the Earth Day movement. And so there were interviews along Malibu, right near these celebrity homes and multi-million-dollar beach homes. And the famed Santa Monica Pier with the steel roller coaster at the end of Route 66. And I rode another slow journalism project from Chicago down to Santa Monica and asked everybody about COVID in 2021. And I published the book in 2022 called Beast of Main Street, a spectacular book. And so I continued to ride along the sandy beach path outside of Los Angeles, and I watched those planes from LAX take out over the beaches there, and I rode past those 6 refineries they have along there, and numerous oil and gas drilling platforms, and watched those tankers just milling around off the shore there, waiting to get into Long Beach. And then I went into Long Beach and I interviewed people by their aquarium, and I interviewed a State's Parks employee about cleaning up Huntington Beach, and I interviewed a father and daughter in Laguna Beach, and a hostel manager in San Clemente, whose life ambition was to, at that point, no more than just to learn how to surf. And yet, she said, my worry about climate change is near a 10. So looking back, I see a nation where 40% of the United States lives along Pacific and the Atlantic coastlines. And these are all more prone to high tide flooding, hurricanes, sea level rise, erosion, and climate change. And that this all translates into societal issues such as for recreation, for water quality, for safety, for coastal population, for animal habitats, and for economic growth. And so these are big, big interviews, and I had another 100 interviews along here on the Pacific coast. So I had a total of 270 interviews in all. And what it all means, I don't know yet, because as I said during my last Route 66 slow journalism project, I paraphrased Kierkegaard, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And only by looking back on all these videos, I'm gonna come back to you with a book and hopefully some deeper meanings and themes that will arise from the voice of the crowd. And here I'm going to read a bit because I want to get this straight. I need to thank the University of Florida Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, which supported the venture by archiving and editing the interviews. And mostly I owe a deep debt of gratitude to the program head, Dr. Paul Ortiz, and to Deborah Hendricks, the program's digital production, film producer, and oral history instructor. And an anonymous donor associated with the program who bought my bicycle for the trip. And I say thank you to every one of the people that were on the Atlantic and Pacific coastlines who shared their climate experiences from widely different ecospheres and points of view, speaking in accents as wildly different as the Maine accent and the Malibu accent. And they were standing on coastlines that are going to see the most dramatic changes. So this was a wild winter, a wild one, and maybe a sign of the times to come. And that is why I say this story cycle is part journalism, part oral history, and part art. And despite the seriousness of the topic and the likelihood of more harsh times ahead, the journey turned me into a bit of a positive person on the climate, a climate optimist. I have a renewed sense of faith in our fellow humankind, and I have awe and reverence for the natural world I bicycled through and witnessed. And as Carl Sagan, the late physicist, once said, I have an enhanced sense of appreciation for the beauty of life and the sheer joy of being alive. So thank you for following us along this audacious and unprecedented journalism project, and its attempt to understand the climate's zeitgeist in these times and on these precious coasts. And if we are on a highway to climate hell, maybe this slow bicycle ride along the Atlantic and Pacific coastal highways will provide clues to some potential off-ramps. And so I say thank you and stay tuned, and I'll see you out on the road. Thank you.